much too complex, too complex, much too complex, too complex, too complex, too complex.
Good afternoon. My name is James K. Holder II. Some of you may know me as Sir James II if you follow me on Twitter. And I'd like to welcome you back to Not On My Watch. First, I'd like to, as always, ask you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. I'd like to ask you also to like, comment, and share this video. I want you to retweet this and repeat this. If you're watching this now, today is Wednesday, March 22nd, 2017, and we have a lot to talk about. This week, in the past week, we've seen a lot of information come out, specifically dealing with the Comey's testimony to the hearing on Russia's involvement in the 2016 election. Also this week, we saw, that was Monday, on March 20th, yesterday, March 21st, we saw the beginning of the confirmation hearings for Trump's Supreme Court nominee, Gorsuch. And that's something I have another issue about. But then lastly, Thursday, which is tomorrow, we will see the Congress will vote or begin the vote, will take the vote on the new proposed repeal of Obamacare, the American Health Care Act, which some like to call Trump Care, some like to call Try and Care. That's another thing we've kind of glanced at, but I want to have a sort of brief focus on something else for today. Over the past few days, you know, I am one of those people who I got up and I was excited originally about the hearing that, you know, was going to feature Comey and Sally Yates and all these other people who were going to obviously come back and confirm everything that we knew about Russia's, you know, working in the election. And they're really sort of, what I left feeling on Monday was less optimism and more of the same. And I felt a little bit discouraged. So today we're going to play a little game instead. And it's an icebreaker, but this game is called Two Truths, One False. And basically, it's a situation where if you do an icebreaker at a meeting or where you're trying to get to know people really quickly, and so the idea of the game is that everybody goes around in a circle and you say three statements, and the group tries to dissect the three statements to determine which one is false about you, as a way of learning. Oh, well, I know these two things about this person, and now this one false thing. So I want to kind of do like a quick. My viewpoint of the two truths, one false from the 2016 election takeaways. And so very succinctly, my three statements are, Russia hacked the 2016 election to undermine our democracy, hurt Hillary Clinton, and help Donald Trump become the 45th president of the United States. That's one. Two is the attack pitched by the Russians focused on fake news and relied heavily on latent racism and sexism that enabled the stories pitched to carry weight and harm specifically Hillary Clinton as a woman and as a successor to the first black president of the United States of America. The third statement is that Bernie would have won. Now, devotees will probably know by now which one of those three statements I believe to be false. But let's go through them very briefly, and just so that we understand and we are on the same page. The hearings, there were a few takeaways. What was most discouraging is that you had a situation where the GOP, well, let's talk about what was confirmed. What was unequivocally confirmed in this hearing by James Comey, the director of the FBI, is that, one, the investigation began as early as July. So we know that around the time Robbie Mook Mook or Mook, however you pronounce his name, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, announced that that was a part of what they believed was contributing to the negative news and contributing to the campaign, there was already an investigation going into this this hacking. So they were not wrong all along. They knew that Russia had a stake in harming our election. We knew that had been confirmed throughout, because up until the point of the second or third debate, Hillary Clinton knew that all 17 intelligence agencies had coalesced around the idea that Russia was hacking the election. Barack Obama, after the election, confirmed that what the White House knew through intelligence briefings that this was also happening. This is sort of one of those things that it's more of a confirmation of when they knew that this was happening, as opposed to that they knew it was happening. Now, the investigation goes into Trump's possible collusion, Trump's possible collusion and ties that Trump's organizations have with the Russians and Vladimir Putin, and the attempt at this sort of hacking agenda. We also know, and this is what's I think the most disturbing thing, one of the most disturbing things, that at the time that Comey responded, that he reopened the probe into Anthony Weiner's computer, which was the week before the election, or 11 days before the election, and that significantly harmed Hillary Clinton's early voting performance, which is what we relied on to get the votes. We knew then that Donald Trump was also under investigation. So though the FBI had closed the investigation into Hillary Clinton and then reopened it out of transparency somewhat, they still James Comey still chose to withhold the information from the American voters that Donald Trump was also under investigation, except that his investigation was tied to his potential hacking of that said election. I think that's very significant. We know that both the DNC and the RNC and other campaigns were hacked. So the Russians didn't simply only get information on the DNC and things that were used to be leaked to target Hillary Clinton. Last thing, and I didn't give a damn about this, but some people thought it was significant. Jim Comey confirmed that Trump was lying, that Obama ordered a wiretap on him. We knew that didn't happen. We knew it was just made up out of thin air, but Jim Comey confirmed that that was also a lie. Most things I find that Donald Trump says is a lie. So it's kind of like, if he says this, Donald Trump playing this particular game would have difficulty. Lastly, Jim Comey actually confirmed quite profoundly and unequivocally that Vladimir Putin's intention in authorizing this hack and meddling into the election was deliberately to undermine the election, undermine Americans' confidence in the vote, like the election, also to harm Hillary Clinton, also to bolster Trump's chances. They don't know whether they believed that their influence was going to lead to a Trump victory, but that was the overall intent. So it really kind of doesn't matter whether the Russians knew that this plan would work or not. There was enough working in concert to allow it to be effective against Hillary Clinton. Now, let's discuss, so to me, this information that we've received on Monday, if you weren't convinced before, we are now confirmed that the first statement I made is true. That that Vladimir Putin hacked this election, Russia hacked this election in order to elect Donald Trump. Do we know whether Donald Trump knew of this or was in on this? Who knows? That's something that's for later. And also, it's also significant to point out that this particular investigation does not consider sort of any domestic aspect of the election itself. So there will not be information coming from this particular investigation to suggest whether machines themselves were hacked or votes were altered. But there's a lot of data about that, and I want to kind of just stick to what we absolutely know. I don't want to get into the specifics of cross-check and laws and potential hacking, because I feel like that's kind of a moot point. If we don't know that it happened, there's kind of no point to talk about it. But we know unequivocally that Russia had that intent. Let's go back over these few things that looking at these statements alone, the takeaways from this hearing that confirm my second statement as true, that latent racism and sexism helped contribute to the efficacy of this particular approach. Case in point, the laptop in question that Jim Comey used to provide the statement to Jason Chaffetz and the rest of the hit squad, the GOP hit squad, that this investigation was reopening 11 days before the election, had to do with Hillary Clinton's long-term aide's ex-husband's laptop. That was enough. The potential information on this laptop, not having had a warrant to search said laptop, was enough information to convince American voters that Hillary Clinton had wrongdoing because of information that was potentially and not given a warrant. Now, this is not at the time that this information was leaked and the time that this announcement came from House Republicans. All we knew was that Jim Comey thought potentially information having to do with another case dealing with the ex-husband of Hillary Clinton's long-term aide possibly had information on it that was incriminating to Hillary Clinton, though they had been investigating the same thing for years and had put it to rest months before. That, to me, is blatant sexism. We can talk about why that's sexism in another episode, but I'm trying to keep these things under 30 minutes now. You also had, and basically what I mean by that is that where you can have a situation where Donald Trump would not have been held accountable to any standards similar to that. You had a situation where Hillary Clinton was condemned for she was able to be held to NAFTA, which is a bill that George Bush Sr. actually approved, that his administration worked on and put through. And she became tied to that by Bernie Sanders. That is sexism. Hillary Clinton was never president before now, obviously. And so there were many things that she was tied to for her husband's sins, whether it was infidelity. And you had situations where Donald Trump was known to have engaged in let's just say unscrupulous activity when it came to sexual assault and treatment of women and sexual harassment, an attitude towards sexual harassment. Hillary Clinton was vilified by Donald Trump and his supporters as being the actual bad person on every issue dealing with what we're seeing unfold now, that the GOP is attacking people of color, LGBT, women, reproductive rights, everything that they've done already. It was accused by Donald Trump and that side, and those attacks were able to stick and impact and influence voters' decisions. That is sexism. Racism. The fact that many of the takeaways in this conversation revolved around asinine assertions levied by one of the biggest liars in American history, Donald Trump, against President Barack Obama. How many lies did Donald Trump tell on Barack Obama over the course of all these years? Whether it was the birther racist lie, whether it was the wiretap lie, whatever it was, there was always this idea that for some reason, even if Trump said something you knew was absurd, it was worth looking into. And yet, at the same token, when Robbie Mook in July said that, and this might be because Robbie Mook is an openly gay man, the first openly gay man to run a presidential campaign that we know of, first openly to run a presidential campaign. And why were his statements discredited? When Robbie Mook brought up the Russia assertion, which now we are finding out to be true 6 months later, why was that dismissed? And yet, why was Trump's wiretapping accusations taken seriously? Why was Trump's birther lie taken seriously? Why was Barack Obama forced to show his birth certificate at the end of the day based on these lies? That is racism, that is sexism. And many of the things that was able to undermine Hillary Clinton in both the primary and the general election were that she was tied to mail decisions from the previous previous four presidential administrations. You had NAFTA from George H.W. Bush. You had things like DOMA and what was it called? Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and all these other things that Bill Clinton did, and the 94 crime bill, which Bernie was able to get away with not. Bernie didn't vote for it. Bernie never apologized for it. Yet Hillary Clinton was vilified for her 96 comments regarding the 94 crime bill, which Bernie Sanders voted for 2 years prior. It's kind of one of those things where Moore was able to stick to her and because she was a woman, and because of the attitudes that voters in this country have towards women aspiring to leadership, if you will. So those statements, among every other thing in the book, we could talk about Dr. Paul Song, but I'd rather not, and his corporate democratic horrors comment. We could talk about them throwing dollar bills at Hillary Clinton's motorcade, neither of which two things were caused by Russian bots, by the way. And we could talk about those things all day long. But sexism is what it is and needs to be called out. So I believe that means the second statement is true, which by default means the third statement, Bernie would have won, is automatically false, in my view. But let's talk about that. Again, knowing that Vladimir Putin authorizes meddling in order to prop up Trump and undermine trust in our democracy, I find it hard to believe that in concert with all of the connections Trump's administration has to Russia, you could talk about Flynn, you could talk about Jeff Sessions' meetings with Russia and all this other stuff. I find it very difficult to believe that the motivation on behalf of Vladimir Putin was simply this grudge with Hillary Clinton herself. That if someone else had been the Democratic nominee or the front runner in the general from a third party, that they would also not have been harmed by a smear campaign from Russia. Because the motivation was to help Trump specifically. Trump was the nominee very early on. We knew very early on that Trump was the nominee. So it enabled much sooner than we knew that Hillary Clinton was the nominee for reasons because Bernie Sanders wouldn't drop out, even though we knew that the math was impossible after the March 15th sweep of Ohio, Florida, Illinois, Arkansas, and North Carolina. When Hillary Clinton won all 5 of those states in the primaries. We knew then that basically Bernie Sanders' chances were slim to nil of winning. And yet he stayed in the race. But that enabled more time to put together this dumping. We talked about 2 sets of dumping at the hearings. We talked about the first set was like a sloppy dump of just hacked, leaked documents that really didn't direct anything. There is also suspected now that there was a domestic aid to the forces that were doing the dumping and the doxing and all this stuff of releasing the information that targeted the information in the second dump of information right before the convention to specifically make those arguments stick farther. There were American people who assumed were involved in hammering out these arguments and figuring out which ones would stick, which ones would be better to focus on. The only way I could believe that Bernie Sanders would have won would be for me to assume that Vladimir Putin would have been as amenable to Bernie Sanders being president as Donald Trump being president. And I don't believe that I hope that that's not the case. I think that's also why many in the far left wing, the alt-left, or whatever you want to call them, are shying away from accepting the argument that Russia was involved in the election hacking at all. And I think it's interesting that you will see them try to scapegoat the bad behavior, the sexism and the misogyny and the racism of calling black Hillary supporters super predators and calling us stupid for not voting for the person who marched with Dr. King for our rights. There were arguments that were rooted in good old-fashioned American white supremacy. It wasn't in Russian. Do you know what I mean? Like the attitude of those things were not new attitudes towards black Americans. And so that's why I believe a lot of the vitriol and the hatred towards black people, the hatred towards women that came from the left was authentic. I don't think it was these people who were being brainwashed to forming these arguments. Many of them were being just sort of good old-fashioned American racist and sexist people. So that being said, voter apathy was a result of this election. And I have to say that it impacted me personally. I have voted in every single election since I became of voting age. And I think within the last week, I'm just going by what I know. I am watching, and we are watching, the GOP, who during this hearing is not focused on getting to the bottom of Russia's involvement, getting to the bottom of the motives of Vladimir Putin. They are simply focused on everything other than an impeachment. They are trying to save as much face as possible. They are working effectively in concert to shield Vladimir Putin's nefarious acts against our election, against our democracy. I believe that in the position we're in, we do not currently have a functioning democracy. We don't. Our election of 2016 was not legitimate. We do not have a legitimate White House. We do not have a legitimate third branch of government, or executive branch of government. And based on the fact that despite the questions and the actual hearings going on now and investigations going on now into the legitimacy of this election, the fact that the Senate is actually confirming or going through the process of confirming a Supreme Court nominee from Donald Trump, I think is abhorrent. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. And it gives me zero faith in our legislative body, which is also run by the GOP. And soon, we will also have a thoroughly compromised SCOTUS, because we know that Merrick Garland was blocked as a nominee from Barack Obama because of the anticipation of the result of this tainted election. We also know that now we have a GOP-run Senate and House that are perfectly fine to put Jefferson Beauregard Sessions at the head of the Justice Department. Rex Tillerson, who doesn't even want to be the Secretary of State, according to statements released this week, as the Secretary of State. I mean, look at the top cabinet positions that they are approving. We can get on Betsy DeVos. We always talk about her, but she's a nightmare. And they're moving forward with the health care bill on Thursday, which I fully believe is going to pass, because I have no faith in them to stand up for what's in the best interest and demands of the American people. I also fully expect them to confirm Gorsuch as the Supreme Court nominee, which means we're going to have 3 basically defunct branches of government. Every single one is going to be worthless. Why is that so particularly damning? This is disheartening to me because I'm apathetic now with this viewpoint. And seeing what's happening now, I am actually discouraged about our democracy. Going into the election, there were also many other people who were discouraged. They fell for this plot by the Russians, to demoralize our society and our democracy and our elections. This idea of rigged was continually shouted out by Donald Trump and also Bernie Sanders. Rigged, rigged, rigged. It's not fair, it's not fair, it's not set up, it's not fair. And the 3 things that I knew going into this election that kept me from being demoralized were that, 1, voting rights are our #1 civil right. That is according to Dr. Martin Luther King himself. I also knew that this was our first election since the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, which allowed for certain provisions, and that happened in 2013. It allowed for certain provisions for states to come up with other laws in place, like voter ID, like gerrymandering, like cross-check, that ultimately weakened our democracy anyway, right? But then also specifically target voters of color. And the reason why they specifically target voters of color is because you had states like Alabama that enacted voter ID laws requiring a driver's license or a state-issued ID, photo ID, to be able to vote. But then they would also close all of the DDSs or DMVs in the more black concentrated areas, making it harder for elderly people and people who aren't as mobile, people who are disabled, people who don't have, you know, the $20 or $22 to pay for a state-issued ID, making that process that much more challenging for people who would need to be able to vote, ultimately weakening the Democratic coalition of voters, which is typically comprised of black women. Shout out to 3 specific black women on Twitter that I think we should all be following. Propane Jane and her Twitter, I'll put these all on screen, but at Doc Rocks, I retweet her all the time, but Propane Jane is a huge one. She talks about this all the time. The angry black lady, whose Twitter name is at Imani Gandhi, and she's a writer. She does political pieces all the time. And also Reagan Gomez, who played Zaria on The Parenthood, not Parenthood, but The Parenthood with Robert Townsend's television show that aired on, I believe, the WB back in the day. Great show. But those 3 people, I think, are, if you're not following 3 black women who are the core, the base of the Democratic Party, those are the 3 you need to be following right now. So do that immediately. I'll wait. Okay, so now we got to get to the facts. Where are we now? We have 3 compromised branches of government, and our only choice to begin repealing back and going back to a sense of normalcy is in 3 phases. 1, we have an impeachment attempt, an attempt to get Donald Trump impeached. But I don't really have faith in that approach at this point, because we've seen that the GOP, who has control of the Congress, is defunct. They do not operate in our best interest. They will not operate in any way that will weaken their particular party. And they will not confirm that. So I think, and this is also compounded by the fact that Comey made an active decision to influence the election, violate the Hatch Act, and release information that Hillary Clinton's investigation was being reopened at a time when he knew that Donald Trump's investigation was already going on in regards to this particular election. I think that's incomprehensible. I don't understand why he's still in charge of the FBI, but that's neither here nor there. So I think, to me, impeachment is out of the window before 2018 election. The 2018 election is the next shot. But we also have a compromised set of, we have a compromised coalition because people are demoralized. And people don't know the facts. People are confused. People are afraid. And we don't have a reliable base of voters on the left because there has been so much distrust sown in from the far left. Based really on, again, an ignorance of facts that have been provided, which lead some of them to believe that Bernie would have won under other circumstances, which, again, my viewpoint is that that particular statement is false. We're also weakened by the fact that, again, the posturing of this particular executive branch, including Jefferson Beauregard Sessions, who has changed the official White House position on the discriminatory nature of voting or of voter ID as a process. So, you know, this is where we are. So, do I have a lot of faith in us retaking back the House and or Senate in 2018, and then that helping us to do an impeachment proceeding? I don't. And save for the fact that Donald Trump is actually sort of walked away in handcuffs because of information pulled out by an investigation that's currently being led by Comey, who decisively chose to release information that would help his candidacy and hurt Hillary Clinton's at a vital time during early voting. I think we have to be sort of realistic about what the possibility of that is. Is something going to come out of this particular election run by this particular investigation being headed by this person that is going to now reverse his original posture towards Trump and the Trump administration. And even if Donald Trump is impeached for some reason other than the election tampering, there is no case to be made to sort of immediately jump over his immediate successor, who would be Mike Pence, who, again, that good old boy network works to do all the same things. Donald Trump, for all it's worth, has set up so much stuff now that if Pence is the successor, nothing's really going to change. Like, nothing is going to improve, except maybe that it weakens their position to run in 2020, which also is going to be a greater challenge because an incumbent president has a much higher chance of being reelected, even if it's Donald Trump, despite how bad his favorables and all this other stuff is. Donald Trump was a really undesirable candidate all year, and everyone thought, oh, there's no way he could win. There's no way. No, people won't vote for him. And he still won. So I don't really have much faith within the channels that are before us, because all three branches of our government are compromised at this point. And our progressive coalition on the left, which, despite the fact that our progressive coalition on the left is also weakened, because you have people of all ethnicities on the left who feel less confident in the strength of the Democratic Party. I firmly believe that our only way forward through this is to focus on the core voting rights. And because we are already sort of on one leg on that issue, we have to turn out the vote at a much, much more aggressive pace than anyone else. We have to, the combination of slightly demoralized Democratic voters, also the increased desire to promote third parties under the Electoral College system, which automatically benefits the GOP. We are in a scenario where the only way we can really ever hope to reverse this is to get 95% participation. You know what I mean? We had significant, black women got it right this time around. Black women are the only people who got it right this time around. We need that spirit from everybody, which to me says we need to listen to that demographic more than we're listening to media sources that, while claim to aspire to progressive beliefs, actually coalesce to white male dominance narratives which support GOP and normalized Trump's bigotry and sexism. We could talk about that in a whole nother show. But I want to say we need to build our coalition. It needs to be focused on the trend of America's, the nature of the browning America, and the fact that people have rights that should be inalienable. So LGBT, people of color, women who believe that women are people, we all need to work much closer together to secure this vote, because while everyone's voting rights aren't under attack within that segment of the population, we rely on white people who are liberals to simply vote in the Democratic electorate against the GOP. We need that. And so it's almost like, because white people don't understand that we are weakened by the GOP's attacks, they feel it's okay to throw votes away to third party and stay home and abstain and wait for something better, because they don't get that they are also weakened by voter suppression. So that is the takeaway I want you all to have. That is the end of my game. This is obviously not a game, but sometimes you got to just, focus on the facts. And these are the facts as I see them. This is what I believe in. And I've told you what I don't believe in. I do not believe in the grand old party. I do not believe that we have three functioning branches of government, and I also do not believe that FBI director has any credibility, and I also don't believe that this was a legitimate election. And despite all of those things, we have to work within the system somehow, and the only way we can do that is to completely turn out the vote. We have to reduce voter apathy, and we have to find ways to do that and educate people about why it's important to vote. So that's going to be a bit more of my focus moving forward. That being the case, as always, I'd like to remind you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, like, comment, share, retweet, and repeat. And as always, I need you to relax, relate, and resist. Thank you.
Too complex.